Hello, my loves. If you're of a certain age, like my age, certain generation, then the word taboo might immediately conjure up for you this sickly, sweet, alcoholic drink that was all the rage and was seen as oh so sophisticated in the 80s. There was that and there was Mirage, if you remember. Ugh. This is not what we're talking about today. What we're going to look at today is what is a taboo and where are taboos in your own life? And there's kind of two parts to that in a sense. So there's the broader sense of taboos, which they're cultural, they're probably quite specifically cultural on a broader sense. But then, and I've been really sitting with this subject's really fascinating me at the moment. But then I think there's some that are a lot more intimate. And there maybe are family taboos, relationship taboos, friendship taboos, and even closer and closer still to those that are almost so hidden, very close to the bone, I would say. And I just like to mention here that if you are watching this quite freshly, hot off the press, then I am going to be running a writing workshop called Close to the Bone on Sunday, I think it's the 13th of November in the afternoon. It's going to be online. So wherever you are in the world, you can join, where we're going to be writing our taboos and really exploring the energy of that and seeing if we can shift something that might be held, some potency that might be held within. So if you're interested, there'll be some information somewhere below or just contact me. Anyway, back to the subject matter for now. So the word taboo means something that is forbidden, but it also means something that is sacred or holy. And that's a surprise because I think we tend to use the word taboo more with the former meaning, something you are not allowed to say, you're not allowed to go there, you're not allowed to speak of. And a lot of that is connected to society and it's also connected to religion as well. So the word taboo was first brought to kind of Western shores in the late 18th century by Captain James Cook, who was a British explorer. On his arrival in the Polynesian Islands, particularly to Tonga, he was handed a meal, and when he invited the people around him to join him with this really beautiful meal that was cooked for him, they refused and said that it was taboo, T-A-B-U. And then he learnt what the word meant for them, and eventually I think he brought it back and it entered the English language and kind of is pretty much sat as it is since then. So taboos really are about what we don't speak of, the unspoken things that we don't say. They might be desires, they might be longings. They're often the things that are against what is known as the normal in society. And if we just take a moment here, if we start to really look at the word normal or what is normal, how can anyone say what is normal? No one is normal. I don't know any normal people. I'm not normal. It's such a strange thing when we think about normal. It kind of doesn't exist really. There are things that we're not allowed to say. And these things might be, I don't know, they might be quite perverse, they might be quite dangerous, they might be quite horrifying, quite ugly. They can surprise or shock somebody if they knew that we were maybe thinking of these things or speaking these things. They give us this glimpse of the underworld. And I'm recording this just a few days shy of Samhain or Halloween, the time when it's said that the veils are the thinnest between worlds. So we really are touching upon underworld territory. There was a Scorpio new moon and solar eclipse a few days ago that maybe some of you really felt. It was a pretty shocking one. So in a way, taboos are kind of the things that we've put in the dark, that we've kind of locked away at the back of the closets, kind of a little bit in shadow realm, though there is a difference between kind of shadows that we look at and also what is taboo. Because often taboo is a thing that we've been told from outside of us is wrong. So here we go. We have suddenly this polarity, this very black and white sense of something being right and something being wrong. And then there's no room for the nuance that might happen in the space between. The thing is, though, if there is certain things that are taboo within us, what happens when we don't speak is that that taboo in a way has taken our voice. And those things have to go somewhere. You know, it's kind of like we swallow those down, we don't get to speak, we tighten the jaw. I think in our culture, particularly, there's a lot of repression, there's a lot of wounding around the throat chakra, the energy center. There's a lot of that kind of jaw holding that we see. All of us hold a hell of a lot of tightness, of unreleased voice, what's not been spoken in our jaw. We've got that whole sense of the stiff British upper lip here as well. And taboos really are things that society, in a way, have put in place to kind of give a sense of structure to the chaos that is life, to bring a sense of civilization to man that was before that uncivilized. So it's creating it's bringing a sense of order and being able to create a structure of society where we can then start to put in all these other different layers. And in a way, they're about, you know, this is appropriate, this is not appropriate. And maybe on a bigger sense, they stop us from collapsing into a sense of chaos, which, I don't know if any of you have read Lord of the Flies. We had to read that at school. It doesn't take a lot for us to collapse into this sense of chaos. I remember quite a few years ago, there were riots in Manchester. I can't remember what happened exactly, but it didn't take long before people were taking to the streets, shops being vandalized, things being stolen. Also making me think of the film The Purge, if anyone's seen that. And there's a whole set of films, I think there's a series as well now, where there's one day of the year when all of the rules around what is allowed, particularly murder, is taken off. And it's a day when people can go mental. And obviously there's huge consequences for that. So these things that are put in place, these particular taboos, like murdering somebody, are put in place to, in a way, to protect us. So taboos, they're everywhere. And as I've started to kind of really, as I say, explore this over the last couple of weeks, I'm really noticing how rife they are and how very subtle they can be as well. The thing is, if we don't speak about things that we need to speak about, or we don't own particular desires or attractions or fascinations, then they turn inwards. And what can happen with anything that is not owned is that it ends up being squeezed out in a way that's not healthy. Things can turn into kind of obsessions, compulsions, fetishes, addictions. There'd be a sense of separation, very unhealthy and ultimately destructive behaviors. Because anything that we separate from within ourselves creates that separation, a split within our own psyche. We are not whole anymore. It's like we're not allowed to bear the wholeness of everything that moves through us, particularly those things that we really don't want to be there, we don't like, we're shocked by, we're appalled by, sometimes quite horrified. But they're still rising up in the experience of who we are as this incredibly complex human being. So we end up negating or denying ourselves. And then with our voice, what happens? We also end up We swallow down our voice, we end up repressing ourselves, we oppress ourselves. Depression can come from this place of stuff that isn't spoken. And in a way, it's less about what is the words and more about the energy or the emotion that we are denying ourselves to feel and let it pass through us. On a bigger sense of this, and a more serious note, obviously, there are certain cultures in the world where that's the least of your worries. Because if there's certain cultures, if you go against what is seen as appropriate, if you speak out your truth, you will literally be killed or stoned to death. So there's quite a harsh penalty, whether it's the one that we impose ourselves or the one that's imposed in the place that we're living in, if we start to go there, to these places that we've been forbidden to do so. Our words have power. They're dangerous. You know, I'm just thinking now about that schoolyard phrase, sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you. It's actually a load of bullshit. Words are incredibly powerful. How we honor the words that we say, the words that we use, I think is probably for pretty much all of us, is something we don't even think about. How many times have we gone against our word? How many times have we promised something, or maybe somebody's promised something to us and then not kind of kept that promise? Our word is our commitment. It's our clarity. It's our truth. If it's coming from the right place, words can destroy anything. They can hurt. They can also free us. They can bring about connection, peace even, and also all the opposites. So I really have a sense of like these words that are not spoken in us, they get swallowed down and they kind of sit like a little bit like hoops, spaghetti hoops. You know, those consonant and vowel spaghetti hoops, if you can still get them. They were a favorite again growing up. You'd have them on toast maybe for tea on a Sunday while you watch Doctor Who and the Love Boat. I can have a sense of all these words jumbling around inside, kind of knowing that they're not meant to be there, but they've got nowhere else to go. And anytime that we suppress our voice or don't own something that is part of our experience, what ultimately happens is we end up creating this ocean of shame that we live in. Because actually, really, if we think about it, the taboos are set, as I said earlier, to denote right and wrong, apparently. So if we are leaning towards or we're drawn towards what is wrong, often that then becomes, I am wrong. And there is shame coating us from head to toe. And I think probably most of us have a hell of a lot of shame that we walk around with. Also, this is even bigger than just our personal selves. I think it's incredibly collective and universal and incredibly insidious, but that maybe is a video for a whole other time. You know, it's interesting, isn't it? I've been thinking about kind of horror films. I love horror films, and also thinking about the popularity of things like the serial killer programs. Like the Dharma, the Ryan Murphy's Dharma series, which I have watched on Netflix. I think it's like, it has been like one of the highest viewed programs for Netflix. And certainly people are obsessed with serial killer programs. So there's something in us that we're fascinated by certain horrors and behaviors, and yet they are taboo. But it makes me think about, well, if we're really honest, we probably all have this propensity towards that kind of horrific violence, even murder, even torture, if we're really, really honest with ourselves. We don't want to sit with this kind of truth, though, do we? Because what does that mean? Who am I then? So the thing is about all of this is that most of us have a sense of morality. As human beings, we have both a conscience and consciousness. So our conscience is like a moral compass. We sense what is right and wrong. And if we're very connected to ourselves, then that's very much informed by what I call our values. They're rules of integrity. They're things that we know keep us living in a place that feels, as I say, integrity for us. It feels right for us. Might be different for somebody else, but it's right for us. And consciousness, having that sense of consciousness, of awareness, the depth that we have that, means that ideally we make choices which are very much of honoring, not just of self, but of each other, and of connection and of humanity. As I say, this is ideal. And we all go against that in many ways because of our own blueprints and patterns and ways that have been brought up and so on. The thing is, when we own and release these taboos that live within us, the energy and the emotions stored, we create more space. We get ourselves back. There's a lot of connection between our own sense of empowerment, heart empowerment, true power, when we free ourselves from having to hide anything that we're experiencing because of shame. And I say shame, and I include in that guilt, judgment, fear, and so on. As we become more honest, what also happens is, ironically or not, we become more trustworthy. I trust people who are honest, even if I don't agree with them. There's something about that level of honesty, that level of really standing in who they are. That means that person is a trustworthy person. I think we all can feel that when we're around somebody that has that standard of integrity and honesty. And when we're around somebody that doesn't, that maybe is trying to please, or, you know, we can feel it. It feels sticky. And I know that I've spoken about this before. The thing is as well, once we start to become more powerful and spacious, and we're not so concerned about being right or wrong or how we're viewed or judged, we become more dangerous. We become less able to be controlled or coerced. And all of these things is what is needed to keep us governable by the society. So you can see there's quite a link there. I'm just going to pause here a moment because I'm really interested in, as I say, the more intimate taboos, and I'll get on to the broader ones a little bit later. So a couple of questions for you right now, and if you're listening to this and you feel to do so, and I really invite you to, you may want to pop your answer in the comments below. I'd be really interested to hear. So the first question is, what was taboo for you growing up in your family? Maybe there were certain phrases that created this sense of what's appropriate, what's allowed, and what was forbidden. There were certain words, certain behaviors. For me, I realized a few years ago, well, I've probably always known this, that there was this phrase in my family of don't upset your mother. This kind of tiptoeing around, don't upset her, don't get her emotional, you know, don't necessarily have big emotions yourself. And it was only when I was able to do that in some way a few years ago and go against the mother, and I'm going to use that the mother as a archetype, that I began to feel a lot of sense of my own power coming back, my own spaciousness. It really has shifted something for me. But this is an interesting question. What was taboo for you in your family? Yeah. And what about within relationships? Maybe friendships, particularly in intimate or lover relationships. What is taboo in that sense? What is kind of off limits. Maybe you have a relationship, you're in a relationship where there is nothing off limits. Go a little deeper. Is there something tiny? Or maybe there really is. Maybe you can't talk about certain things in your relationship because of the fear of the consequences. Again, for me, and I'm going to really own this is quite new for me, because of, again, my own blueprint. And I am doing a lot of work on recovering myself, I would say. The ability to say no in relationship has been quite a taboo for me. You know, the risk of being disapproved of, the risk of rejection, the risk of the other leaving me for me saying no. And I'm sure I'm not alone in this. Oh, and I can feel that as I say, and it is quite new for me. My whole body feels quite energized as I've said that. And I'm saying it without shame. This is something that I'm learning. It's something I've not been able, because I felt it's been a taboo to be able to say because of the risk. So, family relationships. Interesting one to reflect upon. I'm going to shift a little bit to the other meaning of taboo, which, as I mentioned before, is holy or sacred. And I really feel like a while ago, a few hundred years ago, there was a split. There was a split between science, art, and religion, spirituality. There was the shift away from, you can say, goddess religions, kind of earth-based religions. I don't even want to use the word religions, beliefs, philosophers, spirituality, into a patriarchal base where we were told that the sacred, I'm going to use the word God here as a generic word. I'm not talking about God sat on a cloud. So I want to be really clear about that. This is more of that sense of something, the sacred, the essence. That was split from us. And suddenly we were told that this God was outside of us. And it was actually quite a wrathful or vengeful God. And it would judge us and it would punish us. And that we need to kind of behave in certain ways. And if we didn't, we were sinful. And we'd have to repent in order to ask for forgiveness and be given that phrase or words or the blessing or, I don't know, priests in order to be absolved of these sins. So suddenly we've been given this fear of the sacred, the fear of God. And I do think there's something really destructive what happened there. Again, the power was taken away from us of that, of who we are, who we were. We've denoted God to this thing, this being that lives on a cloud, this man with a beard. Generally, that's how it's had been. Lives in a church. You have to go to church. If we don't go, then prayer is a certain thing rather than going to sit by a tree or whatever it is that we naturally are drawn to do to connect with the wonder and awe and beauty of life. And what we created then with this split on one level is quite extreme. You've got fundamentalists, you've got extremists. There's, terrorism, war has been raged because of religion. Religion, one of the biggest things that's created a lot of destruction in the world. That's not necessarily what the sacred was putting us for. Not even putting us, It's this split, the split us all from seeing that within each other. We're punished. We're made to feel powerless, helpless. We're seen as corrupted. I'm wondering if this is where self-hatred stems from, the split originally. The holy is seen as something separate from us that we need to cower towards. And if God is love, then we've kind of taken that away as well, forgetting that we are love. We just are. We are spirit. We are sacred. We are holy. yes, we're human as well, and messy and flawed and complicated and, you know, pretty imperfect and fucked up a lot of the time. But we have that other aspect of ourselves. It's not just found somewhere out there for somebody else to judge. And I also think it's quite ironic because thinking about this earlier, we think back to the Greek and Roman pantheon and kind of stories about them. They were incredibly, you want to use the word corrupt, they were debauched, they were mischievous, they were incestuous, they were sexual, they were messy, they were wrathful. Everything was going on. They just literally lived as Bacchus, just absolute and utter, completely bonkers, really. And engaging in all sorts of questionable behaviors. And yet they were seen as these gods. So, what's wrong with us allowing those aspects in ourselves as well, as I mentioned before, with accountability, responsibility, care, ownership, consent, all of these things. So I'm wondering what it'd be like to bring back the sacred to these things that are seen as forbidden. So I'm gonna just read a little bit of examples I was thinking about. So I'm wondering how much we turned towards what is taboo because of the vulnerability of owning our own needs. They get left unsaid, disowned, and therefore they create this distortion and come out in very unhealthy ways. Needs. Maybe that's for connection, maybe that's for care, whatever that might be. I also believe that it's possibly our fear of our own mortality, or worse, the horrors of suffering, that we keep at arm's length. Yeah, by not, we don't go there. Maybe that's created this taboo that we put on things like, and the fascination, things like serial killers or horror that I mentioned earlier. I think also there's a sense that our desires and longings have to look a certain way. And so we lose that complex nature, what it's like to be a human being, as I mentioned before as well, because we're trying to fit in to that box. I wonder if the violence within us, the cry of our own grief or rage is it's too much for us, that it's almost unfathomable, a little bit like a nuclear bomb. So again, we look to things that have that particular violence outside of us in order to get that met. If you think about fairy tales from a long time ago, they weren't sugary sweet and Disney. They were dark, they were scary, they were warnings. But they were also telling us about these aspects of ourselves and how to be with them, how to make sense of them. They were guides in a way. And there's a lack of that, I think, these days. We look to things like the Kardashians or something, and Jesus, no wonder like we're fucking messed up. This one's a little bit more sensitive, so I'm just going to really own that. What is it? Maybe it's that we crave that return to innocence within ourselves, that we look towards innocent ones in inappropriate ways. Just a thought. And this is really a huge one. What if the fact that we're so disembodied and we fear our own bodies and their functions and needs and wants, because our body, if we really, really drop into it, reminds us of how out of control we are. And this is a really huge one for us in our society. All the products to stay young, all of the surgery that people have, all of that invisibility around being old and aging, the deification of youth, the forgetting of the place and the importance of elders. I think we're so fearful of turning towards the body that is uncontrollable and is going to decay and die, that we, again, it's so taboo to really drop into that and sit with that, that we look elsewhere and distort that fear elsewhere. And what we've done is we've we've introjected our own poison, our own shame, our own guilt. And then we also project that out because it's easier, isn't it, to point towards others? It's easier to blame others. It's easier to say, oh my God, that is, how could they have done that? Rather than to sit and to own all of this that is moving within us as well, if we're really, really honest with ourselves. And that's very sobering, but incredibly liberating. It's allowing ourselves to own these not nice places within us, the horrors within us, you know, allowing these to be seen and to be accepted. That we also know that we have that choice not to necessarily go and act upon any of these taboos that we are drawn towards or that fascinate us. There is a choice there. That's where our power always lies, is in choice. And I wonder what would then free up in us, what would be available to us if we weren't at the mercy of avoiding, touching, being burnt by, placing our finger upon a particular taboo and going, where does this show up in me? If I'm horrified, disgusted by this, what is that showing me in myself? Is there somewhere in me that won't go there, that I will never or haven't yet admitted to? Not to glorify, but in order to make sense of ourselves a little bit deeper. I hope this is all making sense to you. I put a thing out on Facebook last week asking people around taboos because I was really curious what people thought. And I'm just going to read a little list of some of these, and they may be ones that really resonate for you. And again, I invite you to reflect if there's anything that I don't speak of that feels really taboo for you. Again, pop it in the comments, let me know what that is. And these are ones, like I said, that feel kind of more universal in our society as opposed to those more intimate ones within ourselves. This is the list. Money. Money's a big one, isn't it? Talking about money, saying we want loads of money, all this kind of stuff. Sex, massive realm. There's so much taboos around sex because of how much we've disconnected from our own sexuality and the animalness of that, and the strangeness and the perverseness and the kink and power plays and all of this. Again, huge topic, includes gender in that as well. Religion, as I've touched upon, politics, massive, spirituality. Then we have things like pregnancy loss, horror, the horror of that, infertility, abortion, and also the side of that. Someone mentioned about the taboo of talking about birthing being orgasmic for some people. Again, because it's meant to be a certain painful way, or that's a lot of women's experiences. So it's like we're not allowed to then go, actually, there was so much pleasure in birthing. Other things to do with the body, masturbation, fantasies, menstruating. Someone said to me the other day, you know, maybe a taboo is what happens as a woman when you leak, which has probably happened to all women at some point. The horror of that, walking around with a stain of red on your pants, shame. The taboo of mental health. That's certainly something that was taboo for me massively. Now I will absolutely and utterly speak about mental health and my own journey around that, because I think it is so prevalent. Again, same traumas as well. Gender politics, especially at the moment, very tricky sometimes to touch upon certain things because you can be cancelled very quickly. You know, this whole cancel culture business. People are very quick to lash out, especially when we have social media and it's trolling and all that. Bodily functions, as I mentioned, anything to do with the body. There's such a disgust, isn't there? Old people and sex, enjoying sex, having desires as you're older. You know, we don't talk about that. Breastfeeding in public, or choosing not to breastfeed at all. So many taboos within that. Choosing not to have children. in a society that's labeled as normal, you know, married, 2.5 children. Same with choosing not to get married. Or the other side of that, the desire to be kept woman. There's so many of these places where taboos lie. Weight, body weight, body seen as fat, body seen as too thin. Getting naked, you know, the taboo of being naked because it's sexual. Being a parent and your children not being the center of your life. Maybe even thinking about the amount of friends over the years with young children that have come to me almost like whispering as if they're going to be heard by something, somebody, whispering that they want to kill their children. You don't mean it, but in that moment, they're so fed up, they're so pissed, they're so tired. There is something in that. I will add also one of the things that's come up for me, I think because this is something I used to have a lot of, jealousy. Jealousy over people that you love and good things happening to them. No, not allowed to. Not loving your parents. There's a whole thing here around British history, the slave trade, colonialism, racism, and accountability, being able to be in the truth and honesty around that. Sex work, one of the oldest things that originally was very much about the sacredness that's been forgotten. Polyamory, people's choices of how they live. Talking about HIV diagnosis, talking about cancer, other life-threatening and often terminal illness, talking about death, massive, massive, massive. Being unapologetically self-loving. You know, again, we live in society, we have to kind of, you know, demean everything. Being lonely. It's a huge one, isn't it? Being lonely, loneliness. Being single. You know, it can be parodied like in Bridget Jones. And Bridget Jones is great when it came out, but the realness is sitting with that, the pain of that, if that's not actually what you want, the shame of that, particularly in a society that, again, the normal and the glorification, the media, advertising, consumerism is very set up. Couples, families. Things like pleasure and pain and how they're used and punishment. Such a complex weaving in there, weaving through all of us if we really get honest with ourselves. Addiction, the taboo of addiction, and not just the ones we think of, but the addictions that are seen as okay by society. They're insidious, busyness, hyperproductivity, work. There's even alcohol. You know, there's so many that are like, you get a pat on the back for that. Even things like spirituality. You can be addicted to workshops, to meditation, to eating healthy. Yeah, all of these places, there can be the taboos of things we won't actually fucking own. And then I would also say things like really getting real with our fears and with grief and with rage and these messy, again, out of control places that if we go towards too much, we don't know what that might mean, what it might unleash within us, what might destroy everything that we know. So, how is that to hear? What's coming up for you? I'm sure that list is by no means exhaustive. And like I said earlier, I'm much more interested in things that are deeper, that are much more, as I say, close to the bone here. Places that we're scared to look at, places that are hidden, our hidden fears and rages, that we think there's going to be consequences. Because we do, don't we? The consequences are we're not going to belong. The terror of that, so primal. We're going to be shut out, exiled. They defy the family you grew up in, the society, the culture. You know, for a long time being gay, I mean, it still is for a lot of people, a huge thing was taboo. Again, growing up in the era I was growing up in, that was a massive thing. The other thing I thought was really interesting is that maybe, and this as I mentioned before, for me, maybe saying no is where your taboo is, maybe saying yes. maybe feeling that it's safe to be here in your body and to feel everything that you feel because you've experienced situations in your life that took you out of your body. Maybe it's even generational. So it's taboo to actually be in your body, to feel safe and have a right to be here. Interesting. Maybe the taboo for you is in admitting that you have needs and wants and desires to yourself first and foremost, and then maybe to your partner or to the people around you. And maybe the biggest taboo of all is actually bloody well having a fucking voice, you know, to be able to speak whatever it is that needs to be spoken. So thank you for hearing all of that. I'd really, really love to know what you think of all of this. It's a huge topic, and I'm only really just touching upon certain things here. What to do about this? You know, if you're interested in this, then I think one of the most powerful things we can do is start to claim them. And you might do that by getting a journal, which is, you know, maybe your taboo journal, and it literally is for no one else. And writing all this stuff out. Seeing what happens as you do. Staying in connection with your body, with your emotions, with your energy as you do so. Taking breaks when you need to do so if it feels too much. See what happens. Noticing where shame is coming in, where judgment is coming in. Be gentle with yourself. As I mentioned at the beginning, I am running a workshop on Sunday, the 13th of November, close to the bone, where we're going to do this. And we're going to be held in this. And I'm going to explore a little bit deeper about the power of touching upon these places and how, when we start to release the shame around things, we create a deeper sense of empathy and connection and ultimately freedom. So if you're still here, I really appreciate you being here. And thank you for your attention and for your time. It's a juicy topic, isn't it? It feels very connected to this time of the year as well. Get this poison out of our system, this toxic, unspoken out of us. Let's free ourselves. Let's be absolutely fucking real. Let's hold all of these paradoxes and dualities of who we are. Because until we do so, we cannot be totally free. We cannot completely and utterly own the space of who we are in the world, unshakable, and offer so deeply what we are, all of us, here to offer, whatever that might look like. So until next time, and thank you so much. Go well, my loves.